You are a ghost of a girl. A nobody. Her stepmother's voice was a familiar poison. A morning ritual, sharper than the winter frost on the window panes. Lady Alara didn't even look at her eyes fixed on her own reflection in the polished silver spoon. Ghosts are meant to be unseen and unheard. Do try to remember that today, Mara. Mara's hands didn't tremble as she set down the porcelain cup of tea. They never did anymore. Instead, a cold stillness settled deep in her bones, a feeling she had learned to wear like a second skin. She was a shadow in this grand, decaying house, a whisper of a life that was never meant to be lived out loud. Her goal was simple, the same as it was every single day. Perform her duties perfectly, move silently, and above all, do not be noticed. And yet, the emptiness of it all ached. That's why she kept the pendant. Later, in the quiet chill of the laundry room, she pulled it from beneath her drab servant's dress. It was a silver disc etched with the snarling head of a wolf, the sigil of the royal pack. Its weight was a solid, secret comfort in her palm. A promise. It was proof of the one night, years ago, when she wasn't a ghost. The night she had stumbled upon a boy bleeding out in the forest. A prince, ambushed and left for dead. She didn't know who he was then. She only saw someone in pain. Her body moved on instinct. Without thinking, she had torn strips from her own cloak to bind his wounds, her voice a soothing whisper against the darkness. Live. Please. Live. Before he could see her face, she had vanished, but his pendant had snagged on her cloak, a piece of his world now living in hers. Deep down, she knew the truth. Keeping it was dangerous. It was a link to a life so far above her own that even dreaming of it felt like a betrayal of her place. But letting it go? That felt like letting go of the only part of herself that had ever been truly brave. A sudden commotion from the main hall shattered the quiet. A guard, breathless and flushed, was unrolling a scroll. Without warning, a royal herald's voice boomed through the estate, each word a hammer blow against her fragile peace. By decree of the Alpha King, Adrian Holt, the annual royal hunt shall commence in the Vale territory at the rise of the next full moon. The king was coming here, her blood ran cold. The boy from the forest, the prince she had saved. He was a king now, and he was coming back to the very place where their paths had crossed. Her hand flew to her throat, covering the hidden shape of the pendant beneath the rough fabric of her dress. No matter how hard she tried to be a ghost, fate, it seemed, was determined to see her.
The map spread across the war table was a tapestry of his kingdom, forests, mountains, and borders he was sworn to protect. But his eyes weren't on the strategic placement of troops along the Shadow Creek border, a growing point of tension with the rogue packs. No. His mind was miles away, lost in a memory that smelled of wild lavender and rain. Your Majesty, Lord Valerius, the head of his council, cleared his throat, his tone laced with a familiar, weary patience. The Shadow Creek situation requires your attention. They grow bolder. We must show strength. More importantly, you must secure your lineage. Choosing a Luna from a strong allied house would send a powerful message. Adrian's jaw tightened. They saw a king who needed an heir, a kingdom that needed a queen, an alliance that needed forging. They didn't see the man who was haunted. They couldn't understand because they hadn't been there that night, bleeding out, the world fading to black. They hadn't been pulled back from the brink by a soft voice and gentle hands that held more power than any army. My lineage is secure for now, he said, his voice a low growl that silenced the room. The Alpha King's command needed no volume. The rogues will be dealt with, but the royal hunt comes first. He let his finger trace a path across the map, deliberately, slowly, until it landed on a swath of ancient woods. We will hunt in the Vale territory. A thick silence fell over the council. Valerius's eyes narrowed. My king, that is the very place you were ambushed. Is it wise to return to such a place of ill memory? Ill memory? Adrian thought. a bitter, secret smile touching his lips. It was the only memory that felt truly real. He had spent years searching, sending scouts to follow whispers of a girl with healing hands, a girl who smelled of the forest after a storm. Nothing. It was as if she had been a spirit of the woods, a dream he'd had on the edge of death. But his wolf knew better. His wolf remembered. "It is precisely because of that memory that we are going," he stated, his decision final. He would not explain his obsession to these men. He would not tell them that he felt a pull to those woods, a deep, instinctual certainty that he had left a part of his soul there, a part of his soul he was now coming back to claim. Not only that, he was tired of waiting for fate to bring her to him. Instead, he would go to her. He pushed away from the table, his gaze sweeping over his council members. "Prepare the procession. I want to be at the Vale estate within the week." He walked toward the balcony, ignoring their stunned expressions. The wind shifted, and for a fleeting moment, he caught a phantom scent on the breeze. Lavender. Rain. A fire bloomed beneath his skin. He was a king hunting for a ghost, and he would tear his kingdom apart to find her. What he didn't know was whether finding her would save him or destroy him completely.
"You will attend the welcoming feast," Lady Alara announced, her voice leaving no room for argument. She was standing before the grand mirror, admiring the way the candlelight caught the jewels at her throat, while Mara's stepsister, Cordelia, preened beside her. This is Cordelia's chance to capture the Alpha King's eye, her one chance to become Luna, and you will be there. Mara's heart hammered against her ribs. "But I am a servant. I have duties in the kitchens." "Your duty," her stepmother said, turning from the mirror with a look that could curdle milk, "is to do as you are told. You will serve the wine at the high table. You will be silent, you will be efficient, and you will make yourself so utterly unmemorable that the king won't even register your existence. Is that clear?" She leaned in, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Because if you draw even a single glance away from my daughter, I will make you wish you had never been born." The threat was not empty. Mara knew the cold sting of her stepmother's punishments all too well. To be noticed by the king was a death sentence. That night, in her small, cold room, she held the silver pendant up to the moonlight. It seemed to pulse with a faint light of its own, a silent heartbeat. Maybe it was fate. Maybe this was a sign that she should hide it away, bury it in the earth, and forget the girl who had been brave for one single night. Forget the prince whose life she'd held in her hands. But then, as she looked at her own reflection in the tarnished metal, she saw not the ghost her stepmother saw, but a flicker of someone else. Someone stronger. Without thinking, she fastened the leather cord around her neck, tucking the pendant deep beneath the collar of her dress. It lay cold against her skin, a secret shield, a foolish, dangerous, reckless shield. She didn't know what scared her more, her stepmother's wrath, or the terrifying possibility that the king might somehow remember.
The journey to the Vale estate was a tedious affair of ceremony and security. Adrian rode at the head of the royal procession, his face a mask of regal indifference, while his beta, a formidable wolf shifter named Kale, rode beside him. "You're hunting for more than just game, aren't you?" Kyle asked, his voice low enough that only Adrian could hear. They had grown up together, and Kyle was one of the few who knew the full story of his ambush. "The council believes I am showing strength by returning to the site of my near death," Adrian replied, his eyes scanning the dense line of trees they passed. "Let them believe it." "And what should I believe?" Adrian was silent for a long moment. "I believe," he said finally, "that I lost something in those woods, Kale. Something more than a pendant. Truth be told, he felt like a man starved, and she was the only thing that could sate a hunger he couldn't name. Because of that, he had to try." Kyle nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. He knew Adrian's wolf had been restless for years, never settling, always searching. The Alpha's wolf only behaved that way for one reason. It was searching for its mate. Then I hope you find it, my king. As they crested the final hill, the Vale estate came into view, a sprawling stone manor that had seen better days, much like the family that inhabited it. It was a place of faded glory and, for him, a place of destiny. The moment they entered the courtyard, a receiving line was already formed. Lord Vale, a man whose spine seemed to have been removed years ago. His wife, Lady Alara, with a smile as bright and brittle as glass. And their daughter, adorned in silks, her ambition practically vibrating off her. He dismounted, his senses on high alert. He went through the motions, the formal greetings, the polite inclinations of his head. He was a king playing his part. But his wolf was sniffing the air, searching, hunting. And then it happened. As if pulled by a string, his head turned. A breeze, a simple gust of wind, swirled through the courtyard, carrying with it a scent that struck him like a physical blow. Wild lavender and rain. His breath caught. His heart slammed against his ribs. It was her. His gaze ripped through the crowd, past the nobles, past the guards, and landed on the servants huddled near the kitchens. On a girl with downcast eyes and hair the color of rich earth, who was trying so desperately to disappear into the stone walls behind her. The moment their eyes locked, the world tilted. Her gasp was silent, a thing of pure terror he felt more than heard. Her eyes, wide and frightened, held him captive for a single, infinite second before she wrenched her gaze away, hiding herself behind another servant. But it was too late. The air thickened. The space between them burned with a truth his soul recognized. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted. The hunt was over before it had even begun. The ghost had a face, and she was more real, more terrifyingly beautiful than any memory. The king within him demanded decorum. But the wolf wanted to tear through the crowd, fall to its knees, and howl her name.
The great hall was a roaring beast of noise and light. Flames from a dozen hearths danced across golden goblets and polished armor, painting the faces of the nobles in flickering shades of orange and red. Mara moved through it all on silent feet, a ghost in truth, her wine jug cool and heavy in her hands. Her one goal was to be a fleeting shadow, a brief presence that left no impression. With every heartbeat, the pendant under her dress felt like a brand against her skin, a secret she was sure everyone could see. She kept her eyes down, fixed on the stone floor, the scuffed tips of her shoes, anything but the high table where he sat. But then, it happened. As she leaned over to refill a lord's goblet, a sharp, deliberate shove from behind sent her stumbling forward. Her ankle twisted. The heavy jug slipped from her grasp, a gasp tearing from her throat as she fumbled to catch it before it could crash onto the stones. In the span of a breath, the world went silent. The clatter she'd expected never came, but the sudden disruption had been enough. It was a ripple in the pond of noise, and it drew the beast's eye. She felt his gaze before she saw it, a heavy, searing weight that pinned her to the spot. Her head lifted against her will. The moment their eyes locked, time stood still. The king. Not the boy in the forest, not the memory she clutched in the dark, but a man of breathtaking power. His eyes, they weren't just looking at her. They were seeing her. They were stripping away the servant's dress, the years of fear, the ghost-like shell she wore. And in their depths, she saw it. A flash of shock. A flicker of something wild and impossibly familiar. A blaze of recognition. Her breath caught. He knows. The thought was a shard of ice in her veins. Pure, unthinking panic propelled her. Her body moved on instinct. She dipped into a clumsy, trembling curtsy, the jug clutched to her chest like a shield, her face burning with shame. "My apologies, Your Majesty," she whispered to the floor. Without another word, she turned and fled, melting back into the shadows along the wall, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She didn't need to look back. She could feel his stare burning into her, a claim she could not comprehend. And worse. So much worse. She could feel the cold, calculating gaze of her stepmother from across the room, watching the entire exchange. Deep down, she knew the truth. Her life of hiding was over.
Adrian was suffocating. The air in the hall was thick with the cloying scents of roasted meat, wine, and the cloying perfumes of ambitious noblewomen. He smiled, he nodded, he played the part of the gracious alpha king, but beneath the surface, his wolf was clawing at his insides. Her scent, that impossible, maddening scent of lavender and rain, was everywhere and nowhere, a ghost on the air currents. He felt like a man dying of thirst while being forced to drink sand. Because of that, his patience was wearing dangerously thin. He was listening to Lord Vale drone on about his hunting hounds when a small commotion near the table broke his concentration. A servant girl, stumbling. The scent, which had been a whisper, became a roar. His head snapped toward the sound. It was her, the girl from the courtyard. As she fought to catch the falling jug, her face lifted, and her terrified eyes slammed into his. Mine. The word was not a thought. It was a detonation in his soul, a primal truth his wolf screamed from the depths of his being. It was her. The eyes, the scent, the quiet strength she radiated even in her terror, it was all there. Time narrowed to the space between them, the roaring hall fading to a dull hum. He saw the flicker of recognition in her gaze, the sheer panic that followed, and then she was gone. A ghost once more, swallowed by the shadows she so clearly craved. The king in him knew he should do nothing, that he should let her go and proceed with caution. The wolf, however, was done being cautious. It had waited years. It would not wait another second. A beat later, he slowly turned his head, his eyes landing on the perfectly composed face of Lady Alara. He let the silence stretch, watching the way her smile tightened at the edges. She had seen it. She knew. He leaned forward, his voice a low, dangerous purr that cut through the surrounding noise. "You have a fine staff, Lady Vale," he began, his eyes never leaving hers. "That girl, the one who just served the wine, she is very diligent." His words were a test, a stone dropped into a still pond. "Tell me, what is her name?" The question was a command wrapped in silk. It was a claim. He had marked his territory in the middle of her hall, before her entire court. And by the flash of fury in her eyes, a fury she quickly masked with a polite smile, he knew she understood the declaration perfectly. The game had just begun.
The corridor outside the kitchens was cold and damp, a stark contrast to the heat of the great hall. Mara's hands were shaking now, the adrenaline of her flight fading into a chilling dread. "There you are." Lady Alara's voice was soft, but it sliced through the air like a razor. She stepped out from a darkened alcove, a predator emerging from the shadows. Her face was a placid mask, but her eyes were chips of ice. "Did you enjoy your little performance?" she asked, her voice deceptively calm. "It was an accident," Mara whispered, her own voice trembling. "I stumbled. I swear it." "Oh, I'm sure you did," her stepmother purred, taking a slow step closer. The air crackled. "You stumbled right into the Alpha King's line of sight. You, a little kitchen mouse, managed to draw the gaze of a wolf. How very ambitious of you. No, I would never. Do not lie to me." The whisper turned into a vicious snarl. "You think I don't see it? You think I don't know what you are? You are just like her, always reaching for things that would burn you." Her? Mara's blood ran cold. Her mother. She rarely spoke of her mother, the woman who had died when Mara was just a child. What did she mean? Before she could form the question, Lady Alara's hand shot out and gripped her chin, her fingers digging into the flesh. "Let me be clear," she hissed, her face inches from Mara's. "You are nothing. You are a stain on this family's name. He might have looked at you, but he will never choose you, because you are not meant to be chosen. You are meant to be used and forgotten." Her words were stones, each one a heavy blow to Mara's fragile soul. Just as the tears began to well in her eyes, heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. Without warning, a royal guard in the king's silver and black livery rounded the corner. He stopped, his gaze falling on the two of them, and for a moment, an awkward silence hung in the air. Lady Alara instantly released her, her expression smoothing back into one of noble grace. The guard cleared his throat, his eyes fixed on Mara. "The king has a new edict," he announced, his voice formal and loud. "By his royal command, he requires a new handmaiden to serve the court at the palace, one with no prior connections or loyalties." He paused, his gaze unblinking. "The king has chosen Mara Vale."
"This is an act of folly, Your Majesty." Lord Valerius's voice was strained, his face pale in the candlelight of the study they'd been given. He had followed Adrian from the hall, his disapproval a suffocating cloak. To single out a servant girl so publicly, it is unseemly. It speaks of impulse, not strategy. What will the other alphas think? They will see it as a weakness, an emotional indulgence. Adrian stood at the window, staring out into the darkness where he knew she was. His wolf was a raging inferno beneath his skin. Impulse? This was the furthest thing from impulse. This was destiny. This was the answer to years of searching. "The other alphas can think what they wish," Adrian said, his voice dangerously quiet. He turned from the window, his gaze pinning Valerius to the spot. "I am their king. My word is law, not a suggestion to be debated." "But your duty—" "My duty," Adrian interrupted, taking a slow step forward, "is to the strength of my pack, to the future of my kingdom, and I am telling you that girl is important." He couldn't say mate. Not yet. Not to them. They wouldn't understand, because they didn't feel the bond pulsing between them, a living thing that demanded he be closer. He needed her at the palace because it was the only place he could truly protect her from the vipers like her stepmother. He had to understand why she was so terrified, because his wolf would give him no peace, no rest, until her secret was revealed and she was safe by his side. He saw the stubborn refusal in Valerius's eyes and knew that simple logic would not work. So he would use the one thing they could not argue with, his authority. He walked to his desk, his decision made. There was no other way. "My mind is made up, my lord. I am not having a dalliance," he said, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "I am exercising my right as king." He picked up a quill, his movements precise and final. "I require a new handmaiden. It is a position of trust. Therefore, it is best filled by someone with no existing loyalties at court, someone from the outside." He looked up, his eyes locking with Valerius's. "The girl, Mara Vale. She will serve the court. Draft the edict. Send a guard to inform her and her family. She will ride with us to the palace come morning." The order was absolute. It was a clear, strategic move disguised as a whim. He had bent the rules of his own court to bring her into his world. A lamb, brought into a den of wolves. And as the king, it was now his sole responsibility to ensure she was the one who survived.
The carriage ride to the royal palace felt like a journey to the gallows. Mara sat on the cold leather seat, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap her knuckles were white. The world outside the window was a blur of green and gray, a world she was leaving behind. Her old life had been a prison of quiet misery, but at least it was a prison she knew. This was the unknown. A gilded cage filled with predators she couldn't possibly understand. Before she left, her stepmother had given her one final parting gift of words. "Remember what you are, Mara," she had whispered, her smile a chilling slash in her face. "A ghost. Do not for 1 second forget it." Now, the words echoed in the rhythmic clatter of the horses' hooves on the stone road. A ghost. A ghost. A ghost. Eventually, the trees gave way to towering white walls, and the carriage slowed. The royal palace. It wasn't a home. It was a fortress, a mountain of gleaming stone and impossibly high towers that seemed to pierce the clouds. It was built to inspire awe and intimidation. On her, it worked perfectly. The massive iron gates, wrought in the shape of snarling wolves, swung open with a groan that seemed to echo in her bones, a death knell. She stepped out of the carriage into a vast courtyard, and the sheer scale of the place stole her breath. Marble statues of former kings watched her with blank eyes. Guards in polished armor stood as still as stone. The air itself felt different here, heavier, charged with power and secrets. Her world tilted. Something inside her shifted. She was a field mouse, dragged from her burrow and dropped in the center of a lion's den. Her only goal now, her only hope, was to find a corner dark enough to hide in before the lions noticed she was there. But she had a terrible, sinking feeling that the biggest lion of all had already marked her as his prey.
From a high balcony overlooking the main courtyard hidden in the shadows of an archway, Adrian watched her arrive. He saw the carriage bearing the Vale crest roll to a stop. He saw her step out, a small, solitary figure in a simple wool cloak, looking utterly and completely lost. The triumphant roar of his wolf was tempered by a sharp, protective ache in his chest. He had done this. He had forced her from her home, from everything she knew, and brought her here. He had done it to protect her, to get closer to her, to solve the mystery that burned in his soul. But as he watched her stare up at the palace walls, her shoulders slumped in what looked like pure despair, a flicker of doubt entered his mind. Was this protection? Or was it a cage? He saw the calculating glances of the courtiers already moving through the courtyard, their eyes lingering on the new arrival. He knew their minds. They would see her as a curiosity at best, a rival at worst, a pawn, always. He had brought his lamb into a den of wolves, and he was the alpha of the pack. In that moment, his resolve hardened into steel. The doubt vanished, replaced by a cold, fierce determination. He had started this. He would finish it. He turned away from the balcony. The image of her frightened face burned into his mind. The choice was made. He was no longer just a king searching for a ghost from his past. He was an alpha with a mate to protect. His new goal was clear. He would get close to her. He would break down the walls of her fear, and he would uncover the secret she was willing to risk everything to hide. And he would destroy anyone who dared to harm her in the process. The game was set. The pieces were in motion. And he would not lose.
The royal palace was not a home. It was a labyrinth of cold stone and colder stairs. Her new life was a whirlwind of unfamiliar duties, governed by 1,000 unspoken rules. She learned to polish silver until it shone like a mirror, to arrange flowers in a way that pleased the Luna Dowager, and to walk through the endless, echoing corridors without making a sound. Her goal was the same as it had ever been, to become invisible. But here, invisibility was impossible. Because of that, she felt like a single brown moth in a swarm of glittering butterflies. The other servants watched her with a mixture of sharp envy and suspicion. Whispers died the moment she entered a room, only to begin again the second she left. Elspeth, the head housekeeper, was a stern woman with eyes that missed nothing. She assigned Mara the most grueling tasks, her instructions always clipped and cold. "The king has an interest in you," Elspeth had said on her first day, her voice flat. "That makes you a complication. Do your work, keep your head down, and do not become a bigger complication." Which meant she was already a failure. A few days after her arrival, Elspeth summoned her. "The king requires a book from the archives, The Tale of the First Moon. It is rare. You will deliver it to his private library. Do not touch anything. Do not speak unless spoken to, and do not linger." Her blood ran cold. The library. His library. A private audience. Deep down, she knew the truth. This was not a random errand. This was a summons. Her hands trembled as she took the heavy, leather-bound book. With every heartbeat, she felt the pendant under her dress grow warmer, a frantic pulse that matched her own. Her feet felt like lead as she walked toward the lion's den, the book held out before her like a flimsy shield. She didn't know what scared her more, what he might say or what he might see in her eyes if she dared to look at him.
Patience was a virtue for kings, but a torment for wolves. And Adrian was both. He had brought her here, into his world. Yet she remained as distant as a star. He saw her in the halls, a fleeting shadow always turning a corner just as he approached. He caught her scent on the breeze in the gardens, a ghost of lavender and rain that drove his wolf to the brink. Still, he had a plan. A direct confrontation would only terrify her further. He needed to create a space, a reason, a moment where they could be alone without the prying eyes of the court. That's why he had sent the order to Elspeth. He had chosen the book carefully. It was real, it was rare, and it was a perfect excuse. He had chosen the time carefully, an hour when the library would be deserted. He dismissed his guards, leaving the heavy oak doors slightly ajar. He stood by the fireplace, the flames casting dancing shadows across the towering shelves. The air was thick with the scent of old leather and parchment, a smell he usually found comforting. But now it felt empty, incomplete. He waited. The silence stretched, and with every passing second, the beast inside him grew more restless. It wanted to hunt, to track her down, to throw her over its shoulder and carry her away from all the things that made her so afraid. But the king knew better. The king knew this was a delicate siege, one that required strategy, not brute force. Then he heard it. A soft, hesitant footstep in the hall. A feather-light knock on the open door. The scent of wild lavender and rain washed over him, and his entire body went taut. As if summoned, she appeared in the doorway, a deer caught in the gaze of a wolf. She held the book clutched to her chest, her eyes wide with a terror that was so profound, it was a physical blow. His world tilted. He had his ghost right where he wanted her. The question was, would his kingly patience outlast his wolf's savage need?
The library was a cathedral of silence. The only sound was the low crackle of the fire and the frantic hammering of her own heart. He was there. Standing by the hearth, bathed in firelight, he looked less like a king and more like a primal god of the forest. The air thickened, charged with his presence and his scent. Pine and something wild and clean wrapped around her, making her dizzy. "Thank you," he said. His voice was a low rumble, a sound that vibrated deep in her chest. "You can set it on the table." Her body moved on instinct. She scurried forward, placing the heavy book on the polished wood surface, as if it were a bomb about to explode. Her goal was simple. Get out. Get out now. "It is a beautiful place, your home," he said, his voice softer now, almost conversational. It was a trick, a trap. "The woods there, they are ancient." She kept her eyes fixed on the floor. "Yes, your majesty." Her voice trembled. "I find myself thinking of them often," he continued, and she could feel him moving, circling the table, closing the distance between them. A man can lose himself in those woods, or find something he thought was lost forever. Her breath caught. He was talking about that night. He was telling her that he knew. I would not know, your majesty," she stammered, taking a half step back. Before she could move any further, he was there, standing before her. She was forced to stop, to look up. Under the weight of his stare, her carefully constructed walls began to crack. His eyes weren't angry. They were searching, and filled with a strange, aching loneliness that she recognized because she saw it in her own reflection every morning. "Have we met before, Maravale?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Her name hung in the air between them. The silence roared. Deny it. Lie. Be the ghost. Her stepmother's warnings screamed in her head. "No, your majesty," she choked out, the lie tasting like poison on her tongue. In the quiet that followed, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not anger, but a deep, profound disappointment. Without another word, she turned and fled, not daring to look back, the echo of his question chasing her down the cold, empty hall.
The scent of her fear was a bitter tang in the air long after she was gone. He stood there, in the oppressive silence of his library, clenching and unclenching his fists. "No, your majesty." The lie was so fragile, so transparent, he could almost see through it. But it was a wall nonetheless, a wall of pure terror. In that moment he knew his task was far more complicated than he had imagined. An innocent servant girl, wrongly singled out by her king, would be flustered, perhaps confused. She would not be paralyzed by a fear so deep it felt ancient. Deep down, he knew the truth. She wasn't just hiding the fact that she had saved him. She was hiding from something, or someone. And whatever it was, it had broken her spirit long before he had ever found her. A cold fury, sharp and clean, cut through his frustration. The mystery was no longer about a memory. It was about her. What had been done to this girl to make her believe that her one act of selfless bravery was something to be buried in shame? His instincts surged. He needed to see her world, to understand the forces that had shaped her. He needed to watch, to learn, before he could act. The next day, he found his chance. He was walking through a high-arched gallery overlooking one of the palace's many courtyards. Below, servants were going about their duties. And he saw her. She was on her hands and knees, scrubbing the flagstones, her movements small and efficient. She looked diminished, a pale shadow against the sun-drenched stone. Then he saw another figure approach, Cordelia, her stepsister. He watched, his senses sharpening, as Cordelia walked past Mara, her fine silk skirts brushing against the dirty water. Cordelia paused, looked down, and then, with a casual, almost bored flick of her foot, she kicked the bucket over. Soapy, gray water washed over the stones Mara had just cleaned, splashing onto her dress. Cordelia let out a little laugh, a sound like tinkling glass. "So clumsy," she said, loud enough for the other servants to hear. But then, what can one expect from a stray? Adrian saw Mara flinch as if struck. He saw her shoulders slump, her head bow, accepting the humiliation without a single word. She simply reached for her cloth to begin cleaning up the mess. Something inside him snapped. The king knew he should not interfere, that a public display of favor would be dangerous for her. But the wolf saw its mate being harmed. A low growl rose in his throat, a sound of pure, possessive fury. In that moment, his plan changed. Waiting and watching was no longer enough. He would not allow her to be treated this way in his own home. He would not stand by while they tried to grind her spirit into dust. He would change the rules of the game entirely. He would force them all to see her. He turned on his heel, his mind already set. He would announce the royal ball, an event of unparalleled grandeur, and he would find a way to ensure that the little ghost they all tried so hard to ignore would be the one person in the room that no one could look away from.
The palace was a beehive, buzzing with a single electric word: ball. Ladies whispered of silks from the summer isles and jewels from the dwarven mines. Knights boasted of who they would claim for the first dance. And Mara polished silver that would be used at a feast she was not meant to attend. With every gleam of her reflection in the polished metal, she saw a ghost. It felt like a confirmation of her stepmother's words. A grand party was being thrown, and her only role was to be invisible in the preparations. But then, the nights began to change. It started with a rustle in the rose garden. She had been seeking a moment of quiet, a breath of cool night air, when he appeared from the shadows of a marble archway, not as a king, but as a man. "I find I cannot sleep," he'd said, his voice a soft rumble in the dark. She had frozen, ready to flee. But he didn't command or question her. Instead, He just stood there, a silent presence under the moon. And so, she stayed. That first night became a second, and then a third. They became stolen moments, secrets kept by the moon and the scent of night-blooming jasmine. He never once mentioned the library. He never asked about the past. Instead, he asked about her. "Tell me about the woods back home," he'd murmur, his gaze fixed on the stars. "What did you dream of when you were a girl before?" He never finished the sentence. He didn't have to. Maybe it was a trick. A king's clever way of getting what he wanted. But his eyes, when he looked at her, they held no deception. They held a profound loneliness, a hunger for something real in his gilded world. And deep down, she knew the truth. She was starving for the same thing. Her thoughts spun. She found herself telling him about the way the sunlight filtered through the canopy of the ancient oaks, about a secret creek where she would search for smooth stones. She spoke more in those few nights than she had in years, and he just listened. The night before the ball, he found her at their usual spot on the cold stone bench. He didn't say anything for a long time. The silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with 1,000 unspoken things. Then, from the shadows, a lady in waiting appeared, holding a large, cloth-wrapped bundle. "This is for you," Adrian said softly. Mara stared at him, confused. Before she could protest, he was unwrapping it. It was a gown. A simple, elegant dress the color of a midnight sky, made of a fabric that seemed to drink the moonlight. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "I cannot accept this, Your Majesty," she whispered, her voice trembling. It was too much. It was a line she could not cross. He took a step closer, and the space between them burned. "I am not asking you to," he said, his voice intense, insistent. "I am telling you to wear it, tomorrow night." His gaze captured hers, and in that moment, the world narrowed to the few inches between them. "I want to see you, Mara. Not the servant, not the ghost, you."
He was the Alpha King, a man who commanded armies and whose word could reshape the world. Yet every night, he found himself sneaking into his own garden like a nervous boy, just for a chance to speak with a terrified servant girl. The strategist in him knew this was the only way to breach her defenses, to earn her trust. But the strategist in him was being silenced by the man, and the man was being conquered by the wolf. With every story she told of her quiet, lonely life, he saw the glimmers of the woman beneath the fear. He saw a fierce resilience, a deep well of compassion, and a spirit that had been relentlessly beaten down but never, ever broken. She wasn't a ghost. She was a rare, wild bloom that had been forced to grow in the dark, and he was falling for her, utterly, irrevocably. His wolf, for the first time in years, was quiet in her presence. Not sleeping, but content. It lay at peace, recognizing its other half. The primal need to solve the mystery of his past was slowly being replaced by a far more powerful need. The need to see her smile. The need to protect her future. More importantly, he knew his time was running out. Whispers at court were growing louder. His counsel was pressing him to name a noble bride at the ball. He saw the way Cordelia and her mother watched Mara, their eyes like hawks. They were a threat. To make things worse, his own inaction was putting her in more danger. That's why he had the gown made. It was a risk, a huge one, but he needed more than just his own conviction. He needed proof. Proof that would silence his counsel, destroy his enemies, and give him the undeniable right to claim her. And he had a deep gut feeling, a wolf's instinct, that the key to that proof lay with her, that she held it, physically held it, as a secret. When he gave her the gown, he saw the war in her eyes, the terror of being seen battling the desperate human need to be known. "I want to see you," he'd told her. It wasn't just a request. It was a plea. Let me see the girl who saved my life. Let me show the world who you really are." As he walked away, leaving her with the gown, he knew he had just thrown a stone into the water. Come the next night, he would see just how deep the ripples went.
She wore the gown. It felt like a second skin, a suit of borrowed courage woven from midnight and moonlight. For the first time in her life, she did not feel like a ghost. She felt solid, real. And around her neck, hidden just beneath the delicate collar, lay the cool, familiar weight of the silver pendant. Her own secret courage. Entering the ballroom was like stepping into a constellation. 1,000 candles glittered in the chandeliers above, their light reflecting off a sea of jewels and silks. The music was a living thing, a river of sound that swept through the hall. For a moment, she was paralyzed by the sheer grandeur of it all. Then she saw him. He was standing on the dais, the very picture of a king, yet his eyes were not on the fawning nobles around him. They were scanning the crowd, searching for her. As if fate demanded it, their eyes met across the room. A shock went through her, a jolt of heat and light. The world seemed to fade at the edges, the music and the chatter dissolving into a distant hum. He started moving toward her, his path cutting directly through the swirling dancers. Nobles parted before him like the sea. He stopped in front of her, his eyes blazing with an intensity that stole her breath. He didn't say a word. He simply held out his hand. Without thinking, she placed her trembling hand in his. The moment he touched her, her world tilted. He led her to the center of the floor, and as the music swelled, they began to dance. He moved with a predator's grace, his hand firm on the small of her back, guiding her, holding her. It felt less like a dance and more like a declaration. The space between them burned. Her chest ached with an emotion so powerful, so terrifying, she couldn't put a name to it. "You came," he murmured, his voice a low vibration against her ear. "You asked me to," she whispered back, amazed at the sound of her own voice. His eyes softened, and for a second, she saw not the king or the wolf, but just Adrian. He leaned in closer. "I knew you were brave." As he twirled her, the delicate chain of the pendant swung out from beneath her collar. The silver disc caught the candlelight, flashing for a single, brilliant instant. His entire body went rigid. He stopped dancing. Right there, in the middle of the floor, he stopped. His gaze dropped from her eyes to her throat, to the glint of silver against her skin. His breath hitched. His eyes widened, first in disbelief, and then in a look of such raw, staggering triumph that it frightened her. He lifted a hand, his fingers shaking slightly as they brushed against the metal wolf's head. "This," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "Where did you get this?" Her blood turned to ice. The dream had ended. The secret was out.
He scanned the crowd, a growing frustration clawing at him. He had taken this massive risk, and for what? Had she lost her nerve? Had she chosen to remain a ghost after all? But then he saw her, and the world stopped. It wasn't a servant girl in a pretty dress. It was a queen in waiting, a midnight sky come to earth. The breath left his body in a rush. She was magnificent. When he took her hand, a jolt of pure energy, of rightness, shot up his arm. This was it. This was destiny. Dancing with her was like coming home. Every part of him, man and wolf, sang with a single deafening truth. Mate. The way she fit in his arms, the scent of her skin, the terrified hope in her eyes. It was all part of a song his soul had known forever. He was lost in the moment, completely and utterly lost, when a flash of light near her throat caught his eye. A glint of silver. He followed the light, and he saw it, his pendant, the snarling wolf's head, the sigil of his family, the one he had worn since he was a boy, the one that had been ripped from his neck the night he almost died. The proof, the undeniable, irrefutable proof. A tidal wave of emotion crashed over him. Vindication, relief, a fierce, triumphant joy that made him feel lightheaded. It was all real. The memory, the scent, the girl, the bond. He had his proof. The fight was over. He had won. He reached out, his fingers brushing the pendant, the cool metal a solid anchor in a swirling sea of emotion. He opened his mouth, ready to declare it to the world, ready to end the lies and claim his mate before everyone. Before he could speak, a voice, sharp and cold as breaking glass, cut through the music. "That pendant!" The voice belonged to Lady Alara. She was pointing, her face a mask of shocked indignation. "That pendant belongs to my daughter. It was a gift from her late grandmother." She turned her venomous gaze on Mara. "She must have stolen it. The little thief." The music died. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room, and Adrian's moment of absolute triumph shattered into a million pieces. He watched, frozen in a state of cold, rising fury, as his perfect, irrefutable proof was masterfully twisted into a weapon. A weapon aimed directly at the heart of the woman he loved. The beautiful dream had just become a public execution, and his enemy had just revealed herself. The music wasn't dead. It had been murdered. In the echo of Lady Alara's accusation, a new sound was born, the cold, ugly hiss of 100 whispers. Adrian felt the shift instantly. He saw the doubt clouding the faces of his council, the righteous glee on the faces of his rivals, and the calculating curiosity in the eyes of everyone else. They were a pack of wolves, and Lady Alara had just thrown them fresh meat. His proof, his perfect, beautiful proof, had been turned to ash in his hand. A growl, low and guttural, rumbled in his chest. A sound of pure, primal fury that made the lords closest to him flinch. His gaze locked on Mara. She was frozen, her face a mask of such utter devastation, it was as if her soul had been ripped from her body. The ghost had returned, and it was about to be exorcised by public opinion. No, he would not allow it. The king within him screamed for caution, for political maneuvering. But the wolf had seen its mate threatened, and the wolf was done with games. Before the words left her lips, Lady Alara pressed her advantage. "Guards!" she cried, her voice ringing with false authority. "Seize the thief!" 2 royal guards, their faces impassive but their eyes uncertain, took a hesitant step forward. That's when he moved. Between one breath and the next, he was in front of Mara, his body a living shield between her and the world. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't need to. He simply stood there, the full, unbridled power of his alpha aura washing over the room in a suffocating wave. The air thickened. The candles flickered. The guards froze in their tracks. He turned his head slowly, his eyes finding Lady Alara in the crowd. His voice was not a shout. It was something far more terrifying. It was a low, deliberate promise of pain. "You will address your king before you dare to give orders in his hall, Lady Vale." The silence that followed was absolute. Lady Alara's face paled, but she held his gaze, her chin high. "And you," he continued, his voice dropping even lower, "will all bear witness. This accusation is a grave one." He let his gaze sweep the room, a king addressing his subjects. "And as such, this matter will be settled by me, and me alone." Without another word, he reached behind him, his hand finding Mara's. Her skin was ice cold. He wrapped his fingers around hers, a silent, possessive claim. As if the world narrowed to only them, he turned and led her from the center of the ballroom, his path parting the sea of nobles who were too afraid to meet his eyes. He didn't stop until they were through the grand doors, leaving a court in stunned chaos and a seething Lady Alara in their wake. He had just drawn a line in the sand. He had publicly, irrevocably chosen his side. And he knew with a chilling certainty that he had just declared war.
The ballroom faded away, the whispers and the stares replaced by the echoing click of their footsteps on the marble floor. He was pulling her along, his grip on her hand the only thing keeping her upright, the only solid thing in a world that had just dissolved into a nightmare. Her thoughts spun. It was over. Her stepmother had won. She had taken Mara's one beautiful secret truth and twisted it into the ugliest of lies. He pulled her into a small, private antechamber, the heavy door shutting out the world with a soft, final thud. He released her hand, and the loss of his touch left her feeling cold and terrifyingly alone. He began to pace, a caged wolf, his movements radiating a coiled fury that made the air in the room vibrate. "Why?" The word was ripped from him, a sound of raw frustration. He stopped and turned to face her, his eyes blazing. "Why didn't you tell me, Mara? From the beginning. Why the lies?" The question felt like another accusation, and her defenses, ingrained over a lifetime, slammed into place. "I am a servant," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You are the king. There was nothing to tell." "Nothing to tell?" he roared, and she flinched, taking a step back. He saw it, and the anger in his face instantly warred with something else. Something softer. He took a deep breath, visibly reining in the wolf. "Mara," he said, his voice lower now, laced with a desperation that undid her. He walked toward her, not with anger, but with a plea in his eyes. "That night in the forest, I was dying. I remember the cold, the pain, and then you. I never saw your face, but I heard your voice." He was so close now she could feel the heat rolling off him. "You whispered to me. You said, 'Live, my prince.' I have heard those words in my dreams for years. They are the reason I am standing here today." Her breath caught. He remembered. He remembered her words. "That pendant," he continued, his gaze intense, "was a gift from my mother. It is the last thing she ever gave me. I thought I had lost it forever. I thought I had lost you. Why would you hide it? Why would you hide from me?" In the quiet that followed, her walls crumbled. The fear, the lies, the years of believing she was a ghost, it all gave way to the simple, staggering truth in his eyes. He wasn't accusing her. He was trying to understand. "I was afraid," she finally whispered, the confession a painful, liberating thing. Tears she hadn't even known were there began to stream down her face. My stepmother, she told me my whole life that I was nothing, a nobody. That night, I wasn't a nobody, but I was terrified that if anyone ever found out, she couldn't finish. She didn't have to." With a soft sound, he closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to gently cup her face. He wiped away her tears with his thumbs, his touch as reverent as a prayer. "You are not nothing," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't dare to name. "You are everything." In that moment, she made a choice. No more hiding, no more fear. She leaned into his touch, a silent surrender, her point of no return. She would trust him, and they would face whatever came next, together.
They stayed in that room for what felt like an eternity, and she told him everything. About the ambush she'd witnessed from the shadows, about her fear of the attackers returning, about her stepmother's cruelty. A slow, methodical poison dripped into her ears since childhood. With every word, the rage inside him cooled, solidifying into a cold, hard diamond of purpose. This was no longer about a pendant or a memory. It was about justice. Eventually, there was a soft knock on the door. It was Kyle, his beta. His face was grim. "They are demanding a trial, Adrian," Kyle said, his voice low. "Lady Alara is putting on the performance of a lifetime. A grieving daughter, her mother's legacy stolen by a conniving servant who tried to bewitch her king. The council is eating it up. She's already produced 2 servants who will swear they saw Mara near Cordelia's jewel box. Manufactured witnesses. Of course. And there's more," Kale said, his eyes darkening. "I did some digging, like you asked, into the original ambush. The Vale family was in deep debt before Lady Alara married Mara's father. But a month after your accident, all their debts were mysteriously paid off by an anonymous benefactor. The air went still. Adrian looked at Mara, saw the confusion in her eyes, and then a horrifying realization began to dawn. This was never about Cordelia becoming Luna. This was older, deeper. His ambush hadn't been random. Before the words could be spoken, a piercing scream echoed from the corridor. It was one of the handmaidens. Without thinking, Adrian flung the door open. Cale was right behind him. At the far end of the hall, a servant girl was pointing a trembling finger at the grand staircase. Mara's room was in the servants' quarters, up that very flight of stairs. As if pulled by a string, Adrian's eyes followed the girl's terrified gaze. There, on the marble landing, was a puddle of oil, slick and dark, situated perfectly at the top of the steep stone steps. An accident waiting to happen in the dimly lit corridor. An accident meant for Mara. His blood ran ice cold. He turned to look at her to see if she understood the implication. She was staring at the puddle, her face ashen, her hand pressed to her mouth. She understood perfectly. Lady Alara hadn't just lied. She hadn't just cheated. She had tried to kill him once, and now she was trying to finish the job by eliminating the only witness. The stakes had just changed. This was no longer a battle for the truth. It was a battle for Mara's life. The time for strategy was over. This was now a hunt, and the alpha was done being king. He was ready to be the wolf. The scent of spilled oil was the scent of a declaration of war. It clung to the air in the corridor, a slick promise of violence. Without thinking, he grabbed Mara's arm, pulling her away from the staircase, away from the scene of her own near murder. His mind was a maelstrom of cold, killing fury. The king was gone. The alpha was here. He half-dragged, half-guided her through a maze of private corridors, his guards scrambling to keep pace. He didn't stop until he reached the heavy, wolf-crested doors of his own royal chambers. He pushed them open and pulled her inside, the doors shutting behind them with a deafening thud. This was a breach of every protocol. An unmarried king. A servant girl. Alone in his private sanctuary. He didn't care. Let them whisper. Let them condemn him. This room was the most secure in the entire palace, and right now, it was the only place in the world he knew she was safe. She stood in the center of the vast room, looking small and lost amidst the towering bookshelves and rich tapestries. Her arms were wrapped around herself, a fragile defense against a world that was actively trying to kill her. "Adrian," she whispered, his name a fragile breath. Before he could answer, the doors opened again. It was Cale, his face a grim stone mask. "It's worse than we thought," Cale said, his voice a low rumble. To make things worse, he wasn't just bringing bad news. He was bringing news of a coup just without the blades. Lady Alara didn't run. She went straight to the council. "She's claiming you're bewitched, that your judgment is compromised by this conniving servant girl." Adrian's lip curled in a snarl. "They would not dare." "They already have," Cale cut in. "Lord Valerius, citing ancient pack law regarding the Alpha's impartiality, has formally convened a tribunal. They're not just trying Mara for theft anymore, they're trying her for treasonous deception. And Adrian," Cale's eyes were dark with warning, "they have forbidden you from presiding. They claim you are a party of interest." The words were a physical blow. They had used his own laws, the very foundation of his power, to bind him. They had stripped him of his authority to protect her, turning his crown into a worthless piece of metal and his throne into a cage. He was a king in name only, a spectator at the trial of his own soul. His one attempt to protect her by bringing her into the light had backfired so spectacularly that he had handed his enemies the very weapon they needed to destroy her.
The king's chambers were not a sanctuary, they were the eye of the storm. Mara stood on a priceless woven rug, its intricate patterns a blur beneath her feet. She could feel the fury rolling off him in waves, a heat that seemed to warp the very air in the room. This was her fault. All of it. Her foolish hope, her secret pendant, her one night of impossible bravery. It had all led to this. She hadn't just brought ruin upon herself. She was pulling a king down with her. Her old belief, the one her stepmother had hammered into her bones, came roaring back. You are a stain. A curse. She watched him, this magnificent, powerful man, now trapped by his own laws because of her. The guilt was a physical weight, crushing the air from her lungs. She wanted to scream at him to throw her out, to give her to the council, to save himself from the poison that was her very existence. But her voice was gone, lost somewhere in the cavern of her despair. The next morning, the guards came for her. They were polite, their faces impassive, but their grip on her arms was firm. As they led her from the king's chambers, her eyes met his across the room. She saw a raw, impotent rage in their depths, and something else. A desperate promise he no longer had the power to keep. Her heart didn't just break, it shattered. The throne room had been transformed into a courtroom. The grand throne where she had seen him sit was empty. Instead, a long table was set up, with Lord Valerius at its head, flanked by a dozen grim-faced elders. Their eyes were like chips of flint, cold, hard, already decided. Lady Alara stood to one side, a vision of noble grief, dressed in black as if she were already in mourning. Cordelia was beside her, dabbing at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. The trial was a farce, a perfectly orchestrated piece of theater. Lady Alara spoke of her daughter's broken heart, of a precious family heirloom stolen. The two servants Mara had seen in the palace corridors took the stand, their gazes fixed on the floor as they recited their memorized lies about seeing her near Cordelia's rooms. Then they called her forward. Mara Vale, Lord Valerius said, his voice echoing in the cavernous silence. You claim you received this pendant from the king himself, years ago, a reward for saving his life. Her throat was dry. Yes, my lord. It is the truth. Lady Alara let out a soft, pitying laugh. The truth? The truth is that you are a desperate, ambitious girl who saw a wounded prince and concocted a fantasy you hoped would one day elevate you. She turned to the council. My lords, does it not seem more likely that she simply stumbled upon the lost pendant in the woods and has held on to it all these years, waiting for the perfect moment to weave her web of lies? The council members murmured, nodding. The lie was simpler. It was more believable. A servant's ambition was far easier to swallow than a king's secret savior. Her world tilted. They were twisting her one act of goodness into a conniving, ugly thing. I have no proof, Mara whispered, her voice barely audible. Only my word. And the word of a servant against that of a noble house. Valerius trailed off, his meaning clear, is worth nothing.
He was forced to watch from a gallery above the main floor, a king exiled in his own palace. Every word of the trial was a nail being hammered into his coffin. He watched as Alara, with the skill of a master puppeteer, played on the council's prejudices, their fear of scandal, their rigid adherence to class structure. He watched the two servants lie, their fear of Alara clearly outweighing any sense of truth. He saw the cold, calculated smirk on Valerius's face and realized with a sickening certainty that this was not about law. This was a power play. Alara wanted Mara gone, and Valerius wanted a king who could be controlled. His wolf was a screaming, clawing beast inside him, begging to be released. It wanted to leap from the balcony, to rip out the throats of the liars, to burn the whole corrupt system to the ground. But he held it back, his knuckles white where he gripped the balustrade, because he knew that one move, one loss of control, would only prove their point that he was unfit to rule. It would seal Mara's fate forever. He was trapped, utterly and completely trapped by the very power he was supposed to wield. He had armies that could conquer nations, but he could not save one innocent girl from a web of whispers. He had no proof, nothing but the instinct of his wolf and the memory in his heart. And in this room, they were worth less than dust. He locked eyes with Mara across the hall. He saw the flicker of hope in her gaze die, saw her shoulders slump in utter defeat as the weight of the lies became too heavy to bear. He had promised to protect her. He had failed. Then came the final blow. Lord Valerius stood, his face a grim mask of feigned regret. The evidence is clear. The testimony is damning. He looked directly at Mara, his voice devoid of all mercy. This council finds you, Mara Vale, guilty. Guilty of theft and guilty of treasonous deception against the crown. A wave of shock and horror washed over Adrian, so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. No. Valerius wasn't finished. The punishment for such crimes is death.
Guilty. Death. The words were stones dropped into a deep, silent well. They didn't make a splash. They just fell, and fell, and fell. The world went numb, the edges of her vision turning gray. The faces of the council, the triumphant sneer on her stepmother's face, the cold stone pillars of the hall, it all blurred into a meaningless watercolor painting. She was right. She had been right all along. Her stepmother's voice was a whisper in her memory. You are a ghost. You will never be chosen. The moment she had tried to be real, the moment she had allowed herself to feel the warmth of hope, the world had decided to erase her completely. She had flown too close to the sun, and her wings, made of borrowed courage, had melted. The guards took her arms again. This time, their touch was not gentle. They pulled her from the throne room, down winding staircases, deeper and deeper into the cold, dark belly of the palace. The air grew damp, smelling of stone and despair. The last thing she saw before they turned a final corner was him, Adrian. Standing in the gallery above, his face a mask of such utter agony, such profound defeat, that it was a more painful blow than the verdict itself. She had not only lost her life, she had broken her king. The iron door of the dungeon cell groaned shut behind her, the sound of the bolt sliding home an echo of finality. She was left in the cold, oppressive darkness. In the quiet that followed, she sank to the damp stone floor. She was alone, utterly and completely alone. She reached into the bodice of her simple dress, her fingers closing around the cool, familiar shape of the silver pendant. The guards, in their haste, hadn't found it. It was all she had left. She clutched it to her chest, but it offered no warmth, no comfort. It was just a piece of cold, dead metal, a token of a forgotten truth, a reminder of the life she had saved and the life she was about to lose. All was lost. Her one act of bravery had become her death sentence. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in a very long time, she didn't fight the darkness, she let it take her. Darkness and cold. A deep, wet cold that seeped through her thin dress and into her bones. The dungeon was a forgotten place, smelling of damp earth, stone, and the lingering residue of 1,000 forgotten sorrows. This was the end, a final, lonely darkness to swallow the ghost. In the quiet that followed the guard's departure, her stepmother's words were the only ghosts that remained, whispering in the oppressive silence. You are a nobody. You will never be chosen. She had believed them. For so long, she had let those words be the truth of her world. Because of that, she had hidden. She had made herself small. She had tried to vanish. Her fingers, numb with cold, closed around the pendant still tucked inside her dress. She pulled it out, the silver a faint gleam in the sliver of moonlight filtering through a high grated window. It felt heavy in her palm, the weight of her failure, the proof of her foolishness. She brought it closer, her thumb tracing the snarling wolf's head. And as she did, another memory surfaced, pushing through the fog of her despair. Not the memory of the forest, but of the antechamber, of him. His hands cupping her face, his eyes blazing with a truth she had been too afraid to accept. You are not nothing. His voice echoed in her memory, a low, fierce whisper. You are everything. He had believed her. When no one else in the world would, he had looked past the servant's dress, past the lies and seen her. He had risked his crown for her. He had stood as her shield. He had failed, yes, but he had believed. Something inside her shifted, a tiny, defiant spark in the vast, cold darkness of her despair. Her stepmother's power had always come from one thing: Mara's own belief in her worthlessness. The chains weren't just the dungeon walls, they were the lies she had worn her entire life. Deep down, she knew the truth. They could kill her body, they could erase her name, but they could not erase what she had done. They could not take away the truth of that night. She had saved him. She had been brave. And in his eyes, she had been everything. A strange, quiet calm settled over her. The fear, the bone-deep terror that had been her constant companion, finally receded, leaving behind a core of cold, hard resolve. She would die, but she would not die as a thief and a liar. She would die as Mara Vale, the girl who saved her prince, and she would face their judgment not with shame, but with the quiet dignity of her own truth. The spark had become a flame.
The sound of shattering glass was the only thing that could match the storm inside him. He swept a crystal decanter from a table, watching it explode against the stone hearth. It wasn't enough. He wanted to tear the palace down, stone by stone. He was a king in a cage, an alpha in chains. Powerless. Useless. Breaking things won't get her out, Adrian. Cale's voice was a low anchor in his sea of rage. His beta stood by the door, his face etched with grim understanding. "They've condemned her to death, Cale," Adrian roared, turning on him, his eyes blazing with the golden light of the wolf just beneath his skin. "They've used my own laws to tie my hands while they murder my—" He bit the word off. Mate. He couldn't say it. The word was too sacred for this moment of failure. "I know," Cale said calmly, taking a step into the room. "And the verdict is a lie. The trial was a sham, which means we no longer have to play by their rules." Before Adrian could question him, Cale pulled a small dirt-caked object from his tunic and tossed it onto the table. It was a dagger, its hilt wrapped in faded leather, marked with the insignia of a minor lord from the Shadow Creek border. "My scouts caught a rogue trying to flee the territory tonight," Cale explained, his voice tight. "He was one of the ambushers from all those years ago. He sang a pretty little song before he died, about the gold he was paid, by Lord Valerius's cousin." The world went still. The rage inside Adrian sharpened from a wildfire into a single lethal point. Valerius. It wasn't just a power play. It was a coup. Years in the making. Ilara was the pawn, but Valerius was the player. In that moment, everything became terrifyingly clear. He had been trying to fight this as a king, with law and reason, in a game that was rigged from the start. That was his mistake. They had bound the king, yes, but they had forgotten about the alpha. And the alpha's law was simpler. It was absolute. "They want a show," Adrian said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. "They want to execute a servant to prove a point." He looked at Cale, a cold, predatory light entering his eyes. "Then we will give them a show they will never forget."
Come morning, the dungeon door groaned open. The guards did not meet her eyes. She did not flinch. She did not tremble. When they pulled her to her feet, she stood tall. Her simple dress was torn and dirty, her hair a tangled mess, but for the first time she felt regal. She had nothing left to lose, and in that, she found a strange and terrible freedom. They led her from the darkness into the blinding light of the main courtyard. It was filled with the entire court, a sea of silent, watching faces. A wooden block had been erected on a platform. Beside it stood a hooded man, the blade of his axe gleaming in the morning sun. She saw them all, the nervous-looking council members, the curious nobles, and on a raised dais her stepmother and Cordelia, their faces masks of perfect, triumphant sorrow. Lady Ilara met her gaze, a small, cruel smile playing on her lips. It was the smile of a victor. But as Mara was forced to her knees, as her head was pushed down onto the cold, rough wood of the block, she did not see her stepmother's face. She saw his, Adrian, the memory of his eyes, his belief in her, and she clutched that memory to her heart. The drum began to beat, a slow, final rhythm. The crowd held its breath. The executioner shifted his weight, testing the balance of the axe. This is not the end, she thought. A final, defiant prayer. This is not how they will remember me. The drumbeat stopped. The silence was deafening. She heard the whistle of the axe as it began its descent.
The drumbeat was a countdown to the death of his soul. He moved through the palace's hidden passages, Kale and 20 of his most loyal royal guard at his back. They were not dressed for ceremony. They were dressed for war. "The courtyard is sealed, my king," one of the guards whispered as they reached the final corridor. "Valerius has his own men posted at the main doors." "Then we will make our own door," Adrian growled. He could feel it through the stone walls, the collective hush of the crowd, the final terrible silence. His wolf was screaming, a primal, unending roar of pure agony. He was running out of time. He didn't wait for a command. With a roar of his own, he slammed his shoulder into a heavy tapestry-covered wall. The ancient stone shuddered, and with a second blow from him and Kale, it gave way, a section of the wall collapsing inward with a crash of dust and splintered wood. They burst into the sunlit courtyard like wolves emerging from the earth. He saw it all in a single heart-stopping instant. The crowd, turning in shock. Valerius, his face contorting in disbelief. Ilara, her triumphant smile frozen in horror. The executioner, his axe a silver blur in midair. And Mara, on her knees, about to die. "Stop!" His voice was not a king's command. It was an alpha's roar, a shockwave of pure, untamed power that shook the very stones of the palace. The executioner, his arm already in motion, flinched violently, his swing faltering, the heavy axe blade biting into the wood of the block inches from her neck. The tension broke. Chaos erupted, but Adrian only had eyes for her. He strode onto the platform, his loyal guards forming a deadly circle around it. He ignored the gasps, the shouts, the drawing of steel. He walked directly to the block and knelt before her. Her eyes were closed. But as he reached out, his hand gently touching her cheek, they fluttered open. He saw shock, disbelief, and then a tiny, fragile flicker of hope. He looked from her face to the stunned, furious faces of Valerius and Lady Ilara. He stood, pulling Mara to her feet behind him, shielding her once more with his body. He held up the dirt-caked dagger for all to see. "You have tried this woman based on lies," he boomed, his voice resonating with an authority that had nothing to do with a crown. "But I am here to deliver the truth, a truth of conspiracy, of attempted murder, and of treason that sits not with this innocent girl, but in the very heart of my council." He locked eyes with Valerius, and in that single glance the final battle began. The king had been bound, but the alpha had just been unleashed. The courtyard was a tinderbox, and he had just thrown down the torch. With Mara standing behind him, her small hand clutching the back of his tunic, he felt a calm settle over his fury, a predator's calm, the calm before the kill. Lord Valerius was the first to recover, his face a mask of cold political outrage. "This is madness. The king is overwrought. He defies his own council, his own law, all for a common thief." He raised his voice, playing to the crowd. "Guards, do your duty. Remove the king from the platform so the sentence may be carried out." A few of Valerius's personal guards took a step forward, their hands on the hilts of their swords. Kale and the royal guard moved as one, a wall of black and silver steel around the platform. "The only treason here, Valerius," Adrian said, his voice dangerously low, "is yours." He held up the dagger. "This belonged to one of the rogues who ambushed me years ago. A rogue my men found last night. Before he died, he told us a fascinating story about the purse of gold he received for his service. Gold that was traced directly back to you." A wave of gasps rippled through the crowd. Valerius's face went white. "Lies!" he spat. "The ravings of a desperate man told to a bewitched king." "Is it?" Adrian countered, taking a slow step forward. Or is it the truth you've been hiding all these years? The truth of an ambitious lord who tried to kill his prince hoping to install a more compliant alpha on the throne? The pieces were clicking into place in the minds of the court. The sudden payment of the Vale family's debts. Lady Alara's desperate, vicious need to get rid of the one person who had witnessed the ambush. It all made a terrible, perfect sense. But then, Lady Alara shrieked, her voice tearing through the tension. He lies. It was all her. A witch. A thief. She concocted this entire fantasy. In that moment, Adrian knew his word, even with the dagger, was not enough to undo the poison they had spread. He needed more. He needed the one thing they could not deny. He turned to Mara, his eyes asking a silent question. Are you ready? Her hand on his back tightened. She took a tiny, trembling step forward.
This was it. Her moment. Her life had been a story written by others. Her father's grief, her stepmother's cruelty, the king's obsession. Now, for the first and final time, she would write her own ending. She stepped out from behind Adrian's shadow, her legs shaking but holding. She was not a queen. She was not a noble. She was a servant girl in a torn dress, facing a sea of her accusers. But she was done being a ghost. Her voice, when it came, was not a whisper. It was clear, and it carried across the silent courtyard. He is not lying. All eyes turned to her. Lady Alara's face contorted with rage. I was there, Mara continued, her gaze finding her stepmother's. I saw the ambush. I saw the men you hired, the ones whose silence you paid for with a prince's blood. She took another step, her voice growing stronger, fueled by years of unspoken pain. You have called me a thief, but you stole my life. You stole my mother's memory. You tried to steal my voice and turn me into a ghost, but I am not a ghost. She looked at the council, at the nobles, at the faces of the people who had condemned her. And I am not a liar. Enough! Valerius roared, his composure finally cracking. He drew his sword. She is a traitor, and so is the king who protects her. Seize them both. His guards surged forward. But then, a sound ripped through the air that was not human. It was Adrian. A growl tore from his chest, a sound of earth-splitting primal power. His body contorted. The sickening crack of bone, the tearing of fabric, it happened in an instant. Where a king had stood, a beast now crouched. Half man, half wolf, his eyes blazing gold, his teeth bared in a lethal snarl. His royal guard knelt, bowing their heads not to a king, but to their alpha in his purest form. The raw, untamed power that rolled off him was a physical force stopping everyone in their tracks. It was the power of the first wolves, the law of the wild made manifest. He took a step toward Valerius, his claws digging into the wooden platform. Then he turned his massive head, his golden eyes finding Mara. The fury in them softened for a fraction of a second. Then he threw his head back and howled. It was not a sound of rage, it was a sound of declaration, a claim, a sound that every shifter soul in the courtyard understood in their bones. He was claiming his mate. The law of man was broken. The law of the wolf was absolute. He turned back to Valerius, his voice a rasping growl that was perfectly clear in the dead silence. You call it deception. The words were a death sentence. I call it fate. He looked at Mara, then back at the terrified council. I claim her before wolves.
The world bowed. It was that simple. One by one, from the highest lord to the lowest servant, every person with a drop of shifter blood in their veins sank to one knee. It was an instinctual, undeniable response to the Alpha's ultimate decree. The legal trial was meaningless. The accusations were dust. The king's law had been superseded by the Alpha's soul. Valerius stood alone, his sword trembling in his hand, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. His human guards, loyal only to coin, looked at the half-wolf king and the kneeling court, and their courage failed them. They dropped their weapons. Lady Alara let out a choked, broken sound and collapsed, her empire of lies crumbling into the ruins of her own making. It was over. He let the transformation recede, the wolf pulling back beneath his skin, leaving him standing as a man once more, his clothes torn, his body radiating a dangerous energy. "Kyle," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of a thunderclap. "Take Lord Valerius and Lady Alara to the dungeons. They will await my judgment." Kyle and the guards moved, seizing the traitors without resistance. The show was over. He turned to Mara. The courtyard, the kneeling nobles, the dawning sun. It all faded away. There was only her. She was staring at him, her eyes wide with awe, with terror, with 1,000 emotions he couldn't begin to name. He walked to her, ignoring the executioner who was now prostrate on the ground. He gently took her hand, his touch a stark contrast to the violence of moments before. "It's over," he whispered. She didn't answer. She simply launched herself into his arms, her body trembling as she buried her face in his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight, breathing in her scent of lavender and rain. He had won. He had saved her. He had claimed her. In the heart of his kingdom, surrounded by his people, he finally held his entire world.
Later, they stood on a high balcony, the same one from which he had watched her arrive. The sun was fully risen now, bathing the kingdom in a soft, golden light. A new day. A new life. The sounds of the courtyard below were muted. The chaos was being replaced by a new order. Her new order. It was terrifying. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered, her hands clutching the stone balustrade. "How to be whatever it is you just made me." He came to stand beside her, his presence a warm, solid comfort. He didn't touch her, just gave her space to breathe. "You don't have to be anything," he said softly. "Just be Mara." He reached into his pocket and pulled something out. The pendant. It had been retrieved from her cell. He turned her to face him, his eyes serious and gentle. "This was a symbol of a secret," he said, his voice a low murmur. "A proof of a truth you had to hide." He lifted the leather cord. "I want it to be a promise now, a promise that you will never have to hide again." He fastened it around her neck. This time, it did not lie hidden beneath her collar. It lay openly against her skin, the silver wolf gleaming in the morning sun, a mark not of a secret past but of a shared future. A symbol of destiny fulfilled. "You were never a ghost, Mara," he said, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "You were just waiting for the world to be brave enough to see you." She looked into his eyes, and for the first time she did not see a king. She did not see an alpha. She saw her mate, and in his gaze she finally, truly saw herself. Not a ghost, not a servant, not a nobody, but a queen. Chosen not by a king's decree, but by a wolf's soul, and finally, by her own. She leaned in, and as their lips met for the first time, it wasn't an ending. It was a beginning.